are listening to Evenings with Eddie here on the channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is episode 4. We've been doing this officially for 1 month, so thank you for everybody that has liked, commented, and subscribed. I greatly appreciate it, and I want to hear from you. I want you to know what type of stuff you want to see here on the channel, what type of content, what type of things you want to hear me talk about. I'm super excited to hear from you as we continue to grow this show and this channel. Today, we are going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart. We're going to be talking about the Star Wars franchise. Now, Star Wars, the entire Skywalker saga has been completed, right? With The Rise of Skywalker now officially being released on Disney Plus and being, available widely on that platform and for DVD and on demand and all those other things. I kind of wanted to take a second to reflect on the Star Wars saga because when I grew up and fell in love with Star Wars and kind of how I feel about the franchise now are two very different places, and I just kind of wanted to reflect on those thoughts a little bit. When I was a kid growing up, Star Wars was one of the first film franchises that I fell in love with, right? I remember watching it with my mom early on, and it was amazing. Right, you're talking about this larger-than-life space opera, and there's something about A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi that just sticks with you when you're a kid, right? It's your first adult movie, in quotation marks, and it's that first movie that, isn't a classic Disney movie, which is ironic, but, it's something that is live action, larger than life, and there's things that are going to be scary when you're a small child that is you'll find endearing, I guess, is the main takeaway there. And it feels big from the moment you watch it, and it's unlike anything that you've watched up until that point, right? And I remember just kind of falling in love with everything. The robots and the laser fights and Darth Vader as a villain, and I absolutely love A New Hope to the point where I owned the original on VHS, right? And for you kids that are too young to remember, VHS was a tape system, right? So you could watch that movie too many times and it would wear out. The entire movie, for Empire Strikes Back, I remember it would get to a certain point towards the end of the film and the movie would just stop and rewind. And I couldn't watch any of it. Return of the Jedi, I played it so much that the tape broke and it just wouldn't play anymore. A New Hope just wouldn't play anymore. So I had to wait until I got them all on the special edition, in order to get Star Wars again, right? And I loved those movies. They were a huge part of my my creativity growing up and influenced what I wanted to do for a career. I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was heavily influenced by Star Wars, right? And the ability to tell these large stories and these large-scale stories that were just so driven by imagination, and it was awesome. It was great to watch. And then the prequels came out, right? And I remember being very, very excited for the prequels because I remember in Boston there used to be this toy company called FAO Schwartz, and they had in downtown Boston, they had a store, and there was this midnight event release for the action figures, right? Because I grew up having all of the action figures, right? Now, like, obviously the more modern version, not the original ones. I had one or two, but the re-releases were the ones that I had. And it just was an amazing event, and it's captured the imagination of so many people. Now, the first 3 films that basically star Luke, Han, and Leia, I think are very concise. They have problems, right? Because you look at A New Hope, and it is fun. It's awesome. It's great. It's lightning in a bottle. It's why we have the term blockbuster. It's because of that movie. It was one of the highest grossing films of all time. And then Empire Strikes Back has the greatest twist in cinematic history. Right now, it's been played out a million times, and everybody knows what the twist is about Luke being his father. But at the time, that was the greatest twist in cinema, right? So, leading into Jedi, which I enjoy, right? I enjoy Return of the Jedi. I think that out of the three trilogy movies, I think that it's obviously the third, but I do think it holds up better than any of the other Star Wars films in terms of storytelling because you care about the characters. I think we spend too much time with Jabba the Hutt in the beginning, and it kind of takes away from the rest of the adventure that we go on that is far more serious and has a lot more like galactic impact, with the Emperor and the second Death Star and stuff. But we'll get to my take on the Death Stars because it's really frustrating that this entire franchise has devolved to just that one plot device, and it's really kind of disheartening because those first three films, they stand together pretty well, and logically it makes a lot of sense, right? They built this weapon can destroy planets, and so then they're going to rebuild it, right? That's the plan. Now, I know it's really simple because ultimately it's from like a storytelling movie standpoint. So it's like, oh, we are just going to rebuild the same death weapon. We're not going to come up with anything new. We're just going to rebuild it. And it's just like, oh, well, that makes sense as long as you rebuild it, but then just kind of learn from your mistakes and figure out that exhaust port thing. That'll be fine. But I think that those movies stand really well on their own, and they basically have all the goodwill, going forward to the next 6 films, 6+ films, And so when it comes to the prequels, I think that the prequels are really just hindered by poor casting on the part of Anakin Skywalker, right? I think that, I think it's Charlie Lloyd, but the boy who plays Anakin Skywalker in the first film is fine. I think that he's not a particularly great actor, but the story isn't necessarily about Anakin Skywalker in Episode 1, and while the entire prequel trilogy will be about him, he's not the driving force and the main factor in the first film. And that's okay, and that's fine, because I do think Ewan McGregor shines so bright in all 3 of the prequel films. But you look at Anakin's performance throughout all 3 films, and mostly by Hayden Christensen, and he doesn't feel like this amazing warrior, right? He doesn't feel like this amazing warrior that Darth Vader becomes and is like so scary and so mean and big and larger than life. He comes off whiny and, kind of, punkish teenagery, and it really kills a lot of the mystique that I think the original films had around that Darth Vader character and that struggle of him being Anakin Skywalker and turning into Darth Vader and, his son and all that stuff. Now, there are a couple of things that I find to be extremely problematic when it comes to the prequel trilogy, right? I think that the Star Wars prequel films specifically do themselves a huge disservice to the entirety of the Star Wars universe, because they set up these rules that the Jedi specifically need to follow and the Sith need to follow, and they just don't need to exist, right? This idea that there's always 2 Sith, there's no more, there's no less, a master and an apprentice, and that's it. And it's like, well, that hurts any future story of the Jedi being a massive army and the Sith being a massive army and them fighting. Because if there's only ever two, then you undercut who you can have, right? Like you can't have these like 15 crazy warriors, and it's sad because you had to kill off Darth Maul and you had to kill off Dooku, in order to get to Anakin and the Emperor, and it just is this weird cat and mouse game of the Jedi not really knowing that the Emperor's there and that Palpatine is pulling the strings from behind, but he's not really a main presence until the third one that he's like a bad guy, and it's really tough. It's tough to get behind. Then the idea of the Jedi being these like monks is really frustrating, because the idea of Anakin having a son and like that being forbidden because he can't get married is a really annoying plot device, just because it sets up everything with like forbidden love, and it just never really kind of sat right with me that they were trying to hide that love story. And like most of Anakin's motivation and ultimately what turns him into Darth Vader is all based off of this like hidden love that I don't think in normal circumstances a person would just be like, yeah, I guess I'm not gonna be this religious monk knight anymore. Like I guess that's what I'm just not gonna do that anymore. And so it was very odd and very weird that they made these characters so holy when I don't think necessarily Luke ever appeared that way, nor did Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda in the original trilogy. Then there's the midi-chlorians, and that's just mostly silly that it's like, oh, they're microbiology and that's how they like registered Jedi power levels. And it's like, okay, I guess you had to figure out a way to like show that the boy was actually powerful, right? And you had to show that he was like this weird second coming and kind of start the whole prophecy nonsense. And so it's like, I guess you had to come up with a plot device to that, but it's like, oh man, that's a silly one, guys. Like, that's silly. A main problem with the main three films and why people don't seem to like them is just how like bogged down it is in political like debate and jargon. I think you spend far too much time in the Galactic Senate like worrying about how to like politically position yourself in the right ways, and it just kind of loses a lot of the like adventure that the other films had, right? You look at A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and they felt like big adventures, and the prequel films just don't really feel that way, especially when you look at like Attack of the Clones and then ultimately Revenge of the Sith. It has the potential to be war epics, right? There's a galactic civil war that's happening, and it would be really cool to just kind of see how that looks and what that feels like, and telling me stories of the galactic civil war. And they do a great job in ancillary media, and I think that that's the biggest thing with all Star Wars films, right? And Star Wars in general, is that the mainline films do a great job of setting the table for somebody to then jump off and create something, because the Clone Wars is a prime example. You look at the Clone Wars and it takes that gap between episodes 2 and 3, and it really like shows you what this war could be, and it's some of the best stuff that could happen. One of my favorite pieces of media is Shadows of the Empire, and Shadows of the Empire is a book that takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And I think that having, people go in, and we talked about it in the video game episode when I talked about video games and how people that played these games growing up are now creating the game movies. It's the same thing where it's like you have these people that love Star Wars that are creating these other Star Wars things. And it's not really until J.J. Abrams kind of takes hold of the first sequel trilogy film, The Force Awakens, that it feels like that, right? Because these first three prequel movies don't really feel like they really understood what Star Wars was. Now, we get to the sequel trilogy, and it breaks my heart. You know, just to be perfectly honest, I find that the prequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy, Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Rise of Skywalker, just break my heart. I wish that they were so much better, and I don't have a problem with The Force Awakens, right? Because The Force Awakens happens, and it was exciting to have Star Wars back. And yeah, it was a rehash of A New Hope, kinda, with new characters. But I appreciated that. It gave me a familiar story with new characters, right? So I can get back into the Star Wars universe, back into the Star Wars mindset, but I can learn about Finn and Poe and Rey, and I can understand where they fit into this entire universe, and we can kind of go, right? And learn about Kylo, and Snoke is there as well. But having all of these questions and having the way the trilogy be so divisive, I think ultimately ruined this trilogy, right? Because looking at the Star Wars, the sequel trilogy, there are a lot of questions that get asked, and nothing really ends up getting answered, and it ends up being fan servicey, even though that wasn't the original intention. And it's really sad to see that. It's really sad to see that we had this fun film, and we ask a bunch of questions as to how did Kylo get the way he was? Why is Luke in exile? Who's Rey and who's her parents? The interesting thing about Finn and him being a stormtrooper and being conditioned and kind of figuring out that process and, trying to break away. And then Poe just being the fun, gunslinger that he is. There are a lot of fun characters, and I don't think we executed on them as well as we possibly could have. Right off the bat, one of the things that annoys me the most about the sequel trilogy is where we left off at the end of Return of the Jedi is they won, right? The Rebel Alliance had freed the galaxy from the Empire, right? And it was great and it was exciting because now we were going to return back to the Galactic Republic and yay, good guys win. And then we get to Force Awakens, and the scroll at the beginning of the film tells me that, yeah, they won, but then these other people just showed up and they're now in charge. And I can't begin to tell you how disappointing and frustrating that is. And it's like, yeah, no, you idiots let this happen twice now, where you let somebody come in and just become the supreme leader, emperor. And so it's like, yeah, maybe we don't deserve an intergalactic republic because you can't seem to hold it together. How do you allow this First Order to come out of nowhere where you don't know who Snoke is? You don't know who Snoke is, and he's just shown up. It's the First Order now, and they're in charge. And you're just like, oh, now we're the Resistance, and we're on the back foot. And that's where I think that the sequel trilogy really falls, is that it tries to create that same sense of scale where it's David versus Goliath, right? That underdog story of, man fighting the machine. And it's really frustrating because it doesn't feel like we moved forward when it comes to where Return of the Jedi left off. But we accept it, right? I love the franchise enough that I'm just going to accept it. And so then we get to The Last Jedi. And The Last Jedi was directed by Rian Johnson. who is fantastic. If you haven't seen Knives Out, I highly, highly recommend it. But the problem with The Last Jedi is, he set up a movie that was not the movie that I think Star Wars diehard fans wanted, right? I'm guilty of it too, right? Because I love Star Wars just as much as the next guy. And I watched a bunch of people online fantasy write the movie. They fantasy wrote what their Star Wars movie was and raised this person and Kylo's going to do this and this is going to happen and Snoke is that and Snoke is this and this is what that means. And they deep dived into the trailers and every minute detail of the film. And coming out of the biggest criticism of Force Awakens was it was just a rehash of A New Hope, and people were like, oh, blah, it's just so repetitive. They wanted to give us something different, right? This was a different Star Wars movie, and I did appreciate that. I appreciated that Rian Johnson came in and had a vision for what his next 2 Star Wars movies were going to be. Now, there are 2 things that I have huge criticisms about. One is the fan base, and one is the movie itself. I'm going to start with the movie, just because that's where I decided I wanted to start. So, the movie, the biggest criticism I have of the movie is that we have, up until this point, 7 mainline films, right? 7 numbered entries to the Star Wars franchises, and at least 1, maybe 2 prequel-esque side movies, and that being Rogue One and the Han Solo movie. If Solo hasn't come out because I have my release order wrong, whatever. The big one is Rogue One, right? And so in none of those 8 to 9 films have we ever explored the idea of intergalactic space fuel, right? We've never run out of space gas and needed to stop at the space, Safeway. That's never needed to be a thing, right? We've never needed to go to Space Sunoco and fill up on Space Premium, to get our space cruiser from planet to planet. Now, the flip side to that is that the hyperdrive has been damaged multiple times, right? The fact that the spaceship, the hyperdrive was damaged and we can't jump to light speeds, so we can't get from planet to planet very fast, and that's the problem. That's a Star Wars thing. But gas has never been a thing. So for the movie to be basically based in the reality that it's we only have so much fuel to stay so far apart from the bad guys, and we're running out of fuel, and eventually they'll catch us and we're all going to die. And it's that's a frustrating movie. It's also the plot of an episode of Battlestar Galactica, and that's just kind of frustrating when you kind of look at it like that, because you wish that it would be better. You wish that it would be less trapped in a cabin episode than it, of a television show, and more a big cinematic adventure, because we have to come up with weird cockamamie ways to get characters off and on the ship, and they have to go to Space Vegas, and again, none of the things are really inherently bad, I guess, because the movie is watchable, right? And I enjoyed the movie because, like I said, I think Rian Johnson had a bunch of ideas, right? And he had a plan. He had a plan for what he wanted to do, and he had a plan for what his next 2 movies were going to be. And this movie is clearly a bunch of setup, right? Now, the fan reaction to this always really upset me, because he didn't deliver the movie that the fans wanted and the movie that the fans wrote in their head, so that it was bad, and it was panned, and it was trashed, and it was garbage, and people hated it. They just vigorously hated it. Now, there are things in that movie, specifically revolving around Snoke, that, yeah, you're right. This it's frustrating. It's really frustrating that this was your plan, and like it doesn't make any sense. But it's kind of the movie-going generation and Star Wars fans in general that they're like, no, this is what I wanted, and you didn't give me what I wanted, so now I'm mad about it. And I'm not going to wait to see how the story unfolds. I'm just going to be mad about it. And I don't think that was unfair to the movie, and I don't think it was unfair. I don't think it was fair for the movie, and I don't think it was fair to the franchise that is Star Wars, because you end up getting what ended up happening with Rise of Skywalker, because now they have to bring in J.J. Abrams to right the ship and be like, look, this is what we're doing now. And if you thought that Force Awakens was just a rehash of A New Hope, the entirety of Rise of Skywalker was like, oh, we're just going to give them everything that they want. We're just going to give the people everything that they've complained about that we didn't get in The Last Jedi, and we're going to put it all into Rise of Skywalker. And that's a classic example of be careful what you wish for, right? Especially as a fan base. Because if you get exactly what you want, it's not going to be good. It's going to be so sanitized and so watered down and so convoluted that it's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. Because that's ultimately how I felt about the Rise of Skywalker, right? I've never been madder at the beginning of a movie than I was for the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker. Because the scroll starts, and the film tells you right away that Emperor Palpatine is back. And I have a production background. I make movies and television for a living. And one of the things that they tell you in film school right away, it's like lesson number 1. If not, it's top 5. Is show, don't tell, right? I want you to show me, don't tell me that things are happening. And that's all that movie did right up the top. Because it would have been so much better, so much more entertaining, so much cooler if the movie just happened. If the movie happened and we brought back Palpatine, and it would feel more earned, right? And it doesn't feel like it's earned. It feels like this thing is happening, and that's it. And ultimately, the movie, through its choices, tries to rectify everything that happened with, The Last Jedi, and tries to make it good with everybody, and I think it falls flat. And it's really sad, because I don't think that Star Wars is ever going to go dormant the way it did between the Revenge of the Sith and Force Awakens. But I don't think that we're necessarily going to get the type of Star Wars franchise that I think the fans were hoping for, right? I've moved on to the Marvel Cinematic Universe is by far my favorite movie franchise of all time, right? And if you compare Star Wars and the MCU, it's very simple, right? And it's very simple that Kevin Feige over at the Marvel, and he's in charge of the MCU, and he makes sure that everything is going according to plan. And it didn't feel like necessarily with these 3 Star Wars films that they had a plan. And I think that people are more sophisticated, and especially these fan bases are more sophisticated and care more about their property, and they love everything about whatever that property may be. And I know that I personally have found it to be disappointing in the fact that they couldn't stick the landing. That you promised me new Star Wars, and you promised me new Star Wars with all of this, backstory and crazy side stories that have been written and made into comic books and movies and regular books and TV shows and video games. And, I don't think you necessarily pulled from any of them to make something good. And, it's really disappointing. I think that Star Wars has officially gone the way of James Bond in terms of it will always be a major franchise and there will always be Star Wars releases. But I think that the magic of Star Wars is dead. Now, to not end on a sour note, I do want to say that they are in good hands with Disney, right? I had the ability to go to Walt Disney World and go to Galaxy's Edge at Hollywood Studios within the last year. And I absolutely think that they know what they're doing. And I have faith that they'll be able to right the ship to make quality things with the property. Because if Galaxy's Edge is any indication, Rise of the Resistance, the ride, is absolutely fantastic. The land is immersive and everything any Star Wars fan could ever dream of. So I do think that having Star Wars in their control, they'll be able to right the ship. I'll have to wait and see what the next step. They say that the Skywalker saga is done, so I would love to see, what that means, and I want to see what's next, because you look at something like The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian is nominated for 17 Emmys, and it's fantastic. It's arguably the best piece of Star Wars, television film ever made. It's fantastic, and I think that if that's the standard going forward, then there's a bright future for the galaxy far, far away. Now, it's up to you. I want to hear your thoughts. What are your feelings on the new Star Wars trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy, anything and everything Star Wars? Hit me up at The Eddie McCabe on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me all there at The Eddie McCabe. And as always, you can find us here every Wednesday. You can listen to the show. Please like, comment, subscribe. We're trying to grow the channel, so please share with your friends. I want to hear from you, any sort of topics and subject matter you want to hear me discuss. I want to hear from you. I do have something coming that'll be very exciting for those of you who may or may not be familiar with past projects. Stay tuned to that. I'll be announcing it as soon as the end of August comes, but you'll be aware of what's going on there. And then, as always, we have the film series every Friday. We're still rolling strong with the Disney Princess film series, so be on the lookout for that. Brave is dropping this week, and we're only a few princesses left. I think we're in the final 3 after Brave, so be on the lookout for that, and thank you very much, and I'll see you real soon.